As president, what would you do for the city of New Orleans and Mississippi and Louisiana to rebuild?
Oh, Dick, look, I think it's tragic. It is inexcusable what we've allowed to happen there. A little aside, and then I'll get to the specifics. Shortly after Katrina hit, I was visited by a delegation from an African country. And we were talking about the challenges they were facing because of increasing extremism in a part of their country. And the ambassador looked at me and he said, "Do you realize what a recruiting tool you have given to Al-Qaeda with what your government failed to do in responding in New Orleans?" I mean, this was not just a national disgrace. This was an international embarrassment. And so I went down to New Orleans shortly after it happened. I went to visit Dillard University. Well, first I went down to see the evacuees that were evacuated to Houston, and then I worked with Mary Landrieu, the senator, to try to get the same benefits that New York got after 9/11. And I gave Mary this long memo because when 9/11 hit New York, there's certain government policies that we had to get adjusted so that we could get the aid we needed. The Bush administration would not adjust those policies for Louisiana and Mississippi. And it was heartbreaking to me. So I went to Dillard University last year and gave the commencement speech and outlined what I would do. I mean, first of all, one person should be in charge in the White House, and every day I would say, what have you done to fix New Orleans and the Gulf Coast? The fact you have 20,000 families still living in these trailers that are leaking formaldehyde is outrageous. The fact that a lot of the money we finally appropriated once we got a Democratic Congress and then began to waive some of these restrictions has not yet gotten to the people who need it most is inexcusable. I did vote to let the Gulf Coast states get more of the royalties from drilling in the Gulf, so they could use that money to repair the wetlands. Because if you look at, as I went down to southern Louisiana and got briefed and looked at the erosion. I mean, you can't stop storms, but you can sure stop the impact of storms once you rebuild the wetlands and some of the barrier islands. So there's a lot that I would do. But I was so disappointed. President Bush gave that speech in New Orleans in front of the cathedral.
4 days later.
Yeah, right. Well, he didn't even know about it, apparently. Okay. He didn't, his staff had to give him a cassette of the video to show him what was going on. I don't get that at all. And then he had been very negligent in who he appointed to FEMA. FEMA was in good shape when Bill left. We had professionals. And it was turned into kind of a crony holding pattern where people who didn't know where else to go were stuck there. So he didn't have competent people running it. It was stuck into the Department of Homeland Security, which I said you shouldn't do. I wrote and said, do not put FEMA into DHS. They have two different missions. DHS is about, external threats. It's about how we protect our borders. It's how we protect against Al-Qaeda. FEMA is an all-purpose emergency response agency. It was stuck in there. It lost its direct access to the president. It was a significant error. So there's a lot we would fix. In fact, I worked with Trent Lott to try to get FEMA pulled out of DHS, and we couldn't do it, couldn't get it done. And then I passed legislation saying that the director of FEMA had to have experience in handling emergencies, which I thought was sort of self-evident. And it was part of a big omnibus bill that finally went to the president, and the president issued a signing statement saying he would not be bound by the legislation that I had advocated, saying that the director of FEMA had to have experience in handling emergencies. So that made no sense to me. This is another topic I could talk forever on because, I tell you, it was so disheartening, and it so broke trust. I mean, I think everybody could sort of imagine themselves being in such a situation with a natural disaster, an earthquake, a flood, a terrible hurricane again, whatever, and nobody there to help, and the incompetence and the excuses. So, okay, in the immediate aftermath, it was a disaster piled on top of a disaster. Then the president goes and makes his speech, and nothing happens.